Chapter 8, 1969-1970, The Shadow of the War and the Change in the Family. The year 1969 opened with the heaviness that seemed to settle over all of Vietnam. For years, the war had been a constant drumbeat, sometimes distant, sometimes close, but always present. In Đà Lạt, where the Nguyễn family had built a home at 21st 1 Yersin Street, the war felt like a shadow creeping at the edge of the pine forest, whispering its presence even in a cool mountain air. Though the city still carried its reputation as a quiet resort town, a retreat for soldiers and officers to breathe the crisp air, it was no longer untouched. The war reached into every home, into every conversation, into every dream. For the Nguyễn household, 1967 would mark a year of irreversible change. It was the year of my brother Nhan's death, a wound that cut deep into the family's heart and left an ache that time could soften but never fully heal. The nation in transition. On January 20, 1969, across the ocean, Richard Nixon was inaugurated in the 37th President of the United States. In his speech, he spoke of peace with honor, promising that American boys would not fight a war that should be fought by the Asian boys, was the beginning of a policy that came to be known as Vietnamization, a gradual withdrawal from the U.S. troops and a handing over of responsibility to the South Vietnamese Army, ARVN. But on the ground in Vietnam, this policy was not a neat political strategy. It was confusion, anxiety, and uncertainty. Families like the Nguyễn could feel the tension in the air. Fewer American boots on the ground meant more weight on the shoulders of young Vietnamese men. Every son became both a pride and a risk, for the war would claim the lives of thousands more before it was done. Nguyễn Thanh Nhàn service. Among those sons was Nguyễn Thanh Nhàn, one of the beloved children of the Nguyễn family. His path had led him to military service, a duty carried out with the quiet dignity of countless young men of his generation. He had grown up in the embrace of his family, in the laughter of siblings who crowded around meals and fought for space in the shared bedrooms of Yersin house. But war has a way of cutting short the stories of youth, and Nhan's journey was no exception. The exact details of his final days may be lost to history, carried away with the smoke of battlefields and the silence of the soldiers who never returned. What remained was the news delivered with formality that he had fallen in combat. For the parents, hearing those words was just like a storm breaking inside the heart. A son who had once toddled barefoot around the courtyard, who had studied by the dim light of an oil lamp, who had carried within him all the hopes of manhood, now reduced to the name on the report, a coffin draped with the flag of the Republic of Vietnam. The family's grief for the younger siblings, the loss of anh Nhàn was a bewildering wound. Some were too young to fully understand the permanence of death, but they understood the change in their mother's eyes, the way their father sat longer in silence after meals, the way laughter seemed to falter before it could bloom. For the older siblings, it was a confrontation with the reality that any of them could be next. Grief in those days was accompanied by a strange kind of pragmatism. The Republic of Vietnam's military offered compensation for Nhan's death. The envelope of money handed over in somber ceremony seemed at once an insult and a lifeline. No currency could replace a son, a brother, a loved one, yet in the harness of wartime reality, the money became part of the family's survival. The motorcycle and the television were part of the compensation. The family made two purchases that would become symbols of this time: a Honda motorcycle for my brother Lim and a color television for my father. The red motorcycle, sleek and practical, gave Lim mobility. In a city where public transport was limited and the roads stretched long into the countryside, a motorcycle was not merely a vehicle, it was freedom, speed, independence. Nguyễn family, it was also a symbol that life, though scarce, had to move forward. Lim's journey on that motorcycle carried with him not only his own ambitions but also the unspoken memory of a brother who would never ride again. The televisions was something else entirely. A color television in 1969 Đà Lạt was a rare luxury, a glowing box that connected the family to the world. At night, as neighbors gathered in the living room, the family watched not only entertainment but also the war itself. Images of American helicopters, soldiers in rice paddies, burning villages. For my father, the television were both comfort and torment. Comfort in that it brought distraction, torment in that every news broadcast was a reminder of a son he had lost to the very war. Đà Lạt amid war, even as the family mourned, life in Đà Lạt continued with its peculiar duality. By day, the city carried its charm. French villas nested among pine trees, markets filled with scents of strawberries and artichokes, students riding bicycles past the lycée Yersin. By night, the quiet was pierced by distant sounds of artillery, reminders that battles raged not far beyond the hills. Soldiers on leave filled the cafes, their laughter edged with fatigue. Families like the Nguyễn live between these two worlds, one of ordinary life, one of war's relentless intrusion. The Yersin home became a sanctuary. Its walls held not just a family but a community of memory. Across the street, the library stood as a reminder of learning or a quieter, nobler pursuit of knowledge. The younger siblings still went to school, carried notebooks and pens as if these were shields against the chaos outside. In the evenings, the family altar glowed with incense for anh Nguyễn Thanh Nhàn, his name spoken in prayers, his photograph resting among the ancestral spirits. The larger world beyond the Nguyễn household, the year 1969 marked a turning point in the war. In June, President Nixon announced the first withdrawal of 20,000 U.S. troops. By September, more would follow. Yet the war did not ease. In fact, the shifting responsibility onto South Vietnamese forces meant that families like the Nguyễn faced even greater risks. The ARVN, underfunded and stretched thin, carried the burden of bravery but also inevitability of sacrifice. And in September, news rippled around across the world. Ho Chi Minh was dead. The North Vietnamese leader who had guided his people through decades of struggle has passed away. For the South, it was both relief and uncertainty. Would his death weaken the communist resolve or strengthen their determination to honor his legacy? The questions hung heavy in every household, even in the quiet streets of Đà Lạt. The years end as 1969 drew to a close. The Nguyễn family faced their first death without anh Nguyễn Thanh Nhàn. The New Year's altars were prepared with offerings of fruits, sticky rice cakes, and incense, but there was a missing present at the family table. Laughter returned in cautious bursts, but always fell back into silence when memory pulled too strongly. It was the first year the family truly understood what it meant to live between life and death, between present and absent, between holding on and letting go. The war was no longer just something they heard, but about on the radio. It had entered their home, taking a son and left behind a scar that would carry forever. And yet, in the resilience of Vietnamese families, the Nguyễn also discovered a truth that even amid grief, life demanded to be lived. The younger siblings study, the older ones prepare for futures that would carry them far from Đà Lạt, and their parents, with the quiet endurance of a generation that had seen too much, continue to light incense, to prepare meals, to guide the family forward. 1969 was not just a year of loss, it was the threshold into a new chapter where every joy would be shadowed by memory and every decision would be made with the awareness that life could change in the single telegram. The new symbols of a modern life. 2 items purchased with the compensation from Nhàn death shaped the atmosphere of the house in 1970, the Honda motorcycle and the color television. Lim's scholarship, a door to friends. Amid this uncertainty, a rare ray of light appeared in 1970. My brother Lim, one of the eldest brothers, was awarded a scholarship to study in France for 4 years. For the family, my parents were thrilled with the news, especially my mother. She has been praying for her sons to be safe offshore instead of staying in the war country like Vietnam. It was both joy and sorrow for the parents. Joy because education abroad represented opportunity, safety and honor. Sorrow because another son would leave the Yersin home and departure away, carry with the fear of distance, of separation, of not knowing when or if he would return. The preparation for his journey was both exciting and emotional. Suitcases were packed, documents prepared, and farewells exchanged. The siblings watched the admiration as Lim prepared for the world far different from Đà Lạt, the world of European streets and classrooms, of books and ideas. For the parents, sending a son to France was a pride, a reminder that their children were stepping into destinies shaped by forces larger than family itself. A house of memory and hope. By the end of 1970, the Yersin home had become a place where memory and hope coexist. Memory because the presence of Nguyễn Nhàn linger in every corner and every incense stick lit at the altar. Hope because the children still carry forward, some in duties, some in journey abroad, some in simple daily routines that push back against despair. Pine trees outside continue to whisper in the wind. The streets of Đà Lạt are still filled with bicycles and scents of flowers, and inside the Yersin home, the family gather each evening, bound not only by grief, but also by the quiet determination to endure. 1971, the third son, Thanh Tòng and the Corn of the Sky. The year of 1971 arrived in a quiet tension in Đà Lạt. The Yersin home, perched among the pine trees, had already felt the absence of Nguyễn Nhàn and witnessed Lim's departure to France the previous year. Now the third son was preparing to leave. Thanh Tòng, the younger brother, with steady eyes and quiet determination, had been offered a path that few could dream of. He would join the U.S. Navy for helicopter training in America. The news brought a mixture of pride and anxiety. My parents, who had endured the deepest pain with Nhan's death, now faced the challenge of letting another child venture into the world of uncertainty far across the ocean. Yet, unlike a brother gone to war, Thanh Tong's journey promised opportunity, skill, and a chance to escape the immediate dangers of Vietnam. And the Yersin home, the walls seemed to hum with anticipation, the quiet energy of the household bracing for change. Reflections on the passage of time. By 1971, the Nguyễn family had already felt the bitter taste of loss and the challenges of separation. Nguyễn Nhàn was gone, a permanent absence that shaped the heart of the home. Lim had ventured to France, carrying ambition and hope overseas. Now Thanh Tòng had flown to the United States, stepping into vast unknown, trained for navigating skies that were far from the last misty hills. Each departure marked both an ending and a beginning. Children were leaving home physically, but the bonds of the family remained unbroken. Letters, visits, and shared memories kept the connections alive. In many ways, the house on the Yersin Street had become a sanctuary not just of shelter, but of resilience, a place where grief and hope coexist, where life continued amidst the turmoil of war. The parents learned to adapt, to live with spaces left behind, to cherish moments of togetherness, and to trust that their children, though far away, carry the family's love with them. In this period, the Yersin home was not merely a home, it was the heart of a family navigating the turbulence of history while nurturing the wings of its children, each ready to face the world in their own way. This is the end of chapter 8, to be continued.